When Indigo Prescott's needle pierced that rookie's vest for the 13th time, she had no notion it would stop an entire cavalry parade in its tracks. The morning sun painted Fort Galveston's adobe walls the color of dried blood and indigos. Fingers worked their usual magic, mending what men broke, stitching what bullets tore. Her sewing circle sat beneath the Ramada's blessed shade, where desert wives gathered to piece together whatever fragments remained of their carefully ordered lives. "That boy's vest is beyond salvation," muttered Opal Mendez, her weathered hands, never pausing in their own needlework. Ace Sheridan rode through 3 Apache skirmishes in 2 weeks. Fabric ain't meant for such treatment. Indigo held the blue wool up to catch the light. Bullet holes peppered the garment like deadly constellations, each one telling its story of near misses and divine providence. The rookie had stumbled into the fort last evening, more ghost than soldier, his uniform hanging in tatters that spoke of courage or foolishness. She hadn't yet decided which. "Every thread deserves a second chance," she murmured, her voice carrying that particular cadence of women who'd buried too many dreams in desert soil. The needle danced through her fingers as if conducting some ancient symphony only she could hear. You can almost smell the mesquite smoke drifting from the cook fires, taste the dust that settles on everything out here like a fine coating of broken promises. This was borderland living, where hope and desperation walked hand in hand toward an uncertain horizon. Liana Griffin looked up from her embroidery, corn silk hair escaping its pins. "Indigo, honey, you've been working that same spot for near an hour. What's got you so particular?" The question hung in the desert air like heat shimmer. Indigo's fingers stilled, and for a moment, the only sounds were distant horses whickering and the eternal whisper of wind through sage. She traced the fabric's weave with her fingertip, feeling something beyond mere cloth, a presence, a story begging to be preserved. "This vest." She paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound foolish to practical frontier women. "It's like it's got a voice, like it's trying to tell me something important." Mira Booker snorted, her needle flashing silver in the morning light. "Fabric don't talk, Indigo. Though Lord knows, if it did, we'd have plenty to say about the men who wear it." But Indigo barely heard the gentle ribbing. Her attention had focused on one particular bullet hole, perfectly round and positioned directly over where a heart would beat. The edges were singed, suggesting close range, yet somehow the shot had missed flesh entirely. Her fingers explored the surrounding fabric, finding minute details that made her pulse quicken. The weave pattern wasn't standard military issue. Someone had custom-tailored this vest, adding extra padding precisely where bullets had later found their mark, as if the maker possessed prophetic knowledge of dangers yet to come. "Ladies," the voice cut through their domestic tranquility like a cavalry saber through silk. Colonel Zion Price stood silhouetted against the blazing sky, his shadow falling across their sewing circle like an omen. His presence always commanded attention, not through bluster or volume, but through the quiet intensity of a man who'd seen too much death and carried its weight in his steel-gray eyes. "Colonel," Indigo acknowledged, hastily folding Ace's vest. Something in Price's expression suggested this wasn't a social call. "Miss Prescott, I need a word." His gaze lingered on the bundle in her lap. "About that garment you're mending." The other women exchanged glances heavy with unspoken questions. Opal's fingers tightened on her needlework. Liana's embroidery hoop trembled slightly. Even practical Mira seemed to sense the sudden shift in atmospheric pressure that preceded frontier storms. "Of course, Colonel." Indigo rose, clutching the vest against her chest like armor. "Is there something particular? Walk with me." Price's boots rang against the packed earth as he turned toward the parade grounds, away from curious ears. They moved in silence past the enlisted men's quarters, where laundry flapped like prayer flags in the relentless wind. Soldiers paused in their duties to salute their commanding officer, but Indigo noticed how their eyes lingered on the bundle she carried. Word traveled fast in military quarters, and apparently, her midnight mending session had sparked more interest than she'd anticipated. The parade ground stretched before them, a rectangle of beaten earth where men learned to march in formation and die with dignity. At its far end, a lone figure practiced rifle drills with mechanical precision. Ace Sheridan, the vest's owner, moving through his exercises as if demons nipped at his heels. That young man, Price said quietly, arrived at our gates carrying more than battle scars. Indigo watched Ace's fluid movements, noting how he favored his left side, how his eyes constantly scanned the horizon for threats that might or might not materialize. He seems capable enough. Capable, yes, but carrying secrets that could get us all killed. Price stopped walking, his hand resting on his sidearm, not threateningly, but with the unconscious habit of a man who'd learned to sleep with weapons. Within reach. Tell me, Miss Prescott, in your careful examination of that vest, did you happen to notice anything unusual? The question landed between them like a rattlesnake in tall grass. Indigo's fingers tightened on the fabric, feeling again those impossibly placed reinforcements, the custom tailoring that spoke of intimate knowledge about future violence. I'm just mending bullet holes, Colonel. Nothing more. But even as she spoke the words, she knew they were a lie. The vest held secrets that ran deeper than thread and weave, mysteries that connected to the haunted look in Ace Sheridan's green eyes and the way he'd collapsed at their gates speaking words and languages she didn't recognize. Price studied her face with the intensity of a man reading maps in hostile territory. Whatever he found there seemed to satisfy him, at least partially. Tomorrow morning, we host a grand parade, visiting dignitaries from Washington, territorial governor, Army brass who could make or break careers with a single word. His voice carried the weight of unspoken threats. I need to know that vest will be ready. It will be. And Miss Prescott. Price's eyes held hers captive. Whatever secrets that garment might whisper to your skilled fingers, some knowledge carries. A price too dear for decent folks to pay. With that cryptic warning, he strode away, leaving Indigo alone on the parade ground with nothing but desert wind and the growing certainty that her simple act of mending had somehow entangled her in a web of danger she couldn't yet comprehend. But, in the distance, thunder rolled across cloudless skies, and thunder, in Apache territory, sometimes were the sound of approaching hoofbeats. The thunder wasn't hoofbeats after all. It was Bodie Rourke's massive frame stomping across the parade. Ground like a bear with a belly full of hornets. Indigo. His voice boomed across the desert stillness, causing nearby horses to prance nervously in their corrals. That vest you're fussing over, where'd you put it? She clutched the garment tighter, instinctively stepping backward. Bodie served as the fort's quartermaster, a mountain of a man whose gentle heart contradicted his intimidating presence. But today, something wild flickered behind his usually kind eyes. It's right here, Bodie. Why the hand it over? He extended, one massive palm, fingers trembling slightly. Colonel's orders. All damaged uniforms go through proper military channels for inspection. The lie sat heavy between them like smoke from a wet campfire. Indigo had been mending soldiers' clothes for 3 years. Never once had Price demanded official inspection of her work. She took another step back, her mind racing through possibilities, none of them pleasant. Since when do bullet holes require military inspection? Bodie's jaw worked silently, and she caught something unexpected in his expression: fear. Not the healthy caution that kept frontier folks alive, but raw terror that made a grown man's hands shake. Please, Indigo. His voice dropped to a whisper. Just give me the damn vest and forget you ever laid eyes on it. Before she could respond, another voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk. Reckon that decision ain't yours to make, Rourke. Ace Sheridan materialized from the shadows near the enlisted quarters, moving with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to danger. Up close, Indigo could see the fine details Colonel Price's lamplight had hidden, the premature lines around green eyes that had witnessed too much, the careful way he held his left shoulder, the silver scar that traced his jawline like a lightning strike frozen in flesh. This is my vest where discus sin, Ace continued, his voice carrying a subtle drawl that spoke of places farther south than Texas. And I believe the lady was doing me the kindness of mend in it. Bodie's face flushed red as desert stone at sunset. Boy, you don't understand what forces you're messing with. There are things in this territory that'd make Apache raiders look like Sunday school children. Is that a fact? Ace's hand drifted toward his sidearm with practiced casualness. Well then, maybe it's time somebody explained these mysterious forces to a simple soldier like myself. The standoff stretched between the three of them like a bowstring drawn too tight. Indigo found herself studying both men with new eyes, searching for clues in their postures, their words, the careful way they avoided looking directly at the vest in her arms. You can almost feel the desert holding its breath, as if the very sand beneath their feet sensed the importance of whatever was about to unfold. Gentlemen. Mira Booker's practical voice sliced through the tension. She approached carrying a steaming cup of coffee and wearing the expression of a woman who'd survived too many frontier crises to be impressed by masculine posturing. Perhaps this conversation might benefit from a lady's perspective. She pressed the cup into Bodhi's trembling hands, her touch gentle but firm. Now then, what's got everyone's britches in such a twist over a simple piece of mending? Bodhi stared into the coffee as if it might contain answers to questions he was afraid to ask. Mira, there are some secrets that ought to stay buried. Some knowledge that brings nothing but grief to decent folks. Secrets. Myra's laugh held no humor. Honey, I've been keeping frontier secrets since before you learned to shave. Question is, are these the kind that protect people or the kind that get people killed? Ace shifted his weight, and Indigo caught the subtle wince that suggested old injuries still troubled him. Ma'am, with respect, this particular secret might be both. Then perhaps, Indigo said quietly, it's time someone trusted me with the truth. She held up the vest, letting sunlight illuminate the careful stitching she'd already completed. This garment wasn't damaged in any ordinary skirmish. The bullet patterns, the custom reinforcement, the way certain areas were deliberately weakened while others were strengthened. Someone designed this vest to tell a story. All three stared at her with expressions ranging from surprise to alarm. What kind of story? Mira asked. Indigo's fingers traced the constellation of repairs she'd made. The kind written in blood and thread. The kind that might explain why a young soldier carries himself like a man running from ghosts, or why our quartermaster is suddenly interested in military protocol he's ignored for years. Ace's green eyes locked with hers, and she saw something shift in their depths, calculation giving way to what might have been respect. You've got keen eyes, Miss Prescott. Sharp enough to notice that bullet hole over your heart isn't from any Apache rifle. She pointed to the perfectly round puncture she'd spent hours studying. Wrong caliber, wrong powder burn. That shot came from a military-issue Colt, fired at close range by someone who knew exactly where to aim. The silence that followed her observation felt heavy enough to crush stone. Bodhi set down his coffee cup with hands that had steadied considerably. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. She figured it out just from looking at the stitching. Figured what out? Mira demanded. Ace removed his hat, running fingers through dark hair that caught copper highlights in the desert sun. Ma'am, what you're holding isn't just a uniform. It's evidence. Evidence of what? Treason, he said simply. And murder. And a conspiracy that reaches all the way to Washington Territory Command. The words hung in the air like buzzards circling carrion. Indigo felt the weight of the vest in her arms transform from simple cloth to something far more dangerous. A document written in fabric and blood that someone had tried very hard to destroy. The parade tomorrow, she said, pieces clicking together, like a lock finding its key. The visiting dignitaries. This isn't about ceremony, is it? Ace's smile held no warmth. Sharp as a whip and twice as dangerous. No, ma'am. Tomorrow's parade is about justice. Or revenge, depending on how you look at it. Bo Gallagher chose that moment to round the corner of the enlisted quarters, his usually jovial face creased with worry. As the fort's head scout, he possessed an almost supernatural ability to sense trouble approaching from any direction. Folks, he said without preamble, we've got company coming. Dust cloud about 3 miles out. Move in fast and deliberate-like. How many? Ace asked, his entire demeanor shifting from wounded soldier to something far more dangerous. Hard to say for certain, but I count maybe 20 riders. Military formation, but... Bo paused, chewing on whatever troubled him. Something ain't right about their approach. They're coming in like they own the place, but they ain't flying any colors I recognize. Indigo felt the vest in her arms grow heavier still, as if the approaching riders and the secrets woven into the fabric were somehow connected by invisible threads of fate. But as the dust cloud on the horizon grew larger, she realized that some Secrets refuse to stay buried, and some threads, once pulled, unravel far more than anyone bargained for. The riders thundered through Fort Galveston's gates like the four horsemen of the apocalypse, their horses lathered white with sweat and their faces masked by trail dust and grim purpose. But it was their leader who made Indigo's blood turn to ice water in her veins. Major Liana Griffin dismounted with fluid grace, her cavalry uniform immaculate despite the hard ride. Her corn silk hair, which had escaped its pins so charmingly during this morning's sewing circle, now lay perfectly coiffed beneath her military cap. The transformation from gentle frontier wife to hard-eyed officer struck like a physical blow. "Well, I'll be damned," Mira whispered. "Liana's been playing us for fools this whole time." Ace's hand found his sidearm, but Liana's voice stopped. "Him cold. I wouldn't, Sheridan. My men have you covered from 6 different angles." Her smile held all the warmth of a rattlesnake's kiss. "Besides, we're all friends here, aren't we? You can almost taste the betrayal thick as copper pennies on your tongue. Feel the way trust shatters like glass beneath a boot heel." The woman, who'd sat beside them for months, sharing stories and stitching samplers, had been weaving a web of deception with threads far deadlier than embroidery silk. Colonel Price emerged from his quarters, his face a mask of carefully controlled fury. "Major Griffin, this is an unexpected pleasure." "Colonel." Liana's acknowledgement carried military crispness with an undertone of mockery. "I trust you received my telegram about the inspection?" "I received no telegram." "How unfortunate. Communications in this godforsaken territory are so unreliable." Her pale eyes fixed on Indigo with predatory intensity. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." The vest felt like lead in Indigo's arms. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but 20 rifles held her frozen in place like a bird, mesmerized by a snake. "I don't understand," she managed. "Of course you don't, dear." Liana's voice dripped false sympathy. "You're just a simple seamstress who got caught up in matters far beyond her comprehension. Hand over Sheridan's vest, and we can all pretend this unpleasantness never occurred." But Ace stepped forward, placing himself between Indigo and the mounted soldiers. "Afraid I can't allow that, Major. See, that vest contains evidence of war crimes committed by your commanding officer. Evidence that a certain general has been selling weapons to Apache raiders and blaming the attacks on territorial disputes." Liana's laugh rang across the parade ground like breaking crystal. "Evidence? You mean the wild accusations of a deserter and murderer? Really, Sheridan, you give yourself too much credit. Is that what you're calling me now?" Ace's drawl had thickened, becoming something dangerous. "Last I heard, your general branded me a traitor for refusing to participate in his little arms dealing enterprise." The pieces clicked together in Indigo's mind with horrifying clarity. The custom reinforcement in the vest, it hadn't been added for protection. It had been designed to hide something. Her fingers explored the fabric with new purpose, finding what she'd missed before, a pocket sewn so skillfully into the lining that it felt like natural padding. "There's something hidden in here," she announced, her voice carrying across the sudden silence. "Indigo, no." Bodhi stepped forward, but Liana's soldiers swung their rifles toward him. "Let her look," Liana commanded. "I'd like to see what our resourceful seamstress discovers." Indigo's nimble fingers found the hidden seam, working it open with the same skill she'd used to mend countless garments. The pocket disgorged its secrets like a wound bleeding truth. Folded papers covered in official letterhead, detailed maps of Apache territories, and most damning of all, correspondence bearing the signature of General Marcus Thornfield, the same general scheduled to review tomorrow's parade. "Orders to provide rifles and ammunition to Chief Red Hawk's band," she read aloud, her voice growing stronger with each revelation. "Payment schedules for orchestrated attacks on civilian settlements. Plans to blame territorial expansion failures on military incompetence rather than deliberate sabotage." The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples that would spread far beyond Fort Galveston's adobe walls. "Enough." Liana's composure finally cracked. "You have no idea what forces you're challenging. General Thornfield has connections that reach all the way to the War Department. Cross him, and you'll find yourselves facing charges of treason, sedition, and murder." "Funny thing about treason," Mira said quietly, "it's usually committed by folks in positions of trust." Price drew his sidearm with deliberate slowness. Major Griffin, by the authority invested in me as commanding officer of this garrison, I place you under arrest for conspiracy, treason, and accessory to murder. I think not, Colonel. Liana raised her hand, and her soldiers readied their weapons. You see, General Thornfield anticipated resistance, which is why he sent me with full authority to relieve you of command and place this fort under martial law. She produced an official document bearing impressive seals and signatures. Any attempt to interfere with my duties will be considered an act of rebellion against the United States Army. The standoff stretched taut as a wire fence in winter. 20 rifles against 5 people and the terrible weight of truth. Indigo clutched the evidence tighter, realizing that she held in her hands the power to expose corruption that reached the highest levels of territorial command, if she lived long enough to use it. But then Bo Gallagher's voice cut through the tension like a knife through canvas. Ma'am, begging your pardon, but there's something you might want to consider before you start shooting American citizens on American soil. Liana turned toward him with irritation. Speak quickly, Scout. Well, see, while you and your boys were riding hard for the fort, I took the liberty of sending a telegram to the territorial governor. Told him about some mighty interesting visitors we were expecting and how they might be carrying forged documents and orders that don't come from any legitimate authority. Bo's grin spread wide as sunrise. Funny thing about communications in this territory, sometimes they work just fine when you know which lines ain't been cut by Apache raiders, or folks pretending to be Apache raiders. The color drained from Liana's face like water from a broken vessel. Of course, Bo continued conversationally. That telegram also mentioned how 20 armed riders attacking a U.S. Army fort might constitute an act of war against the United States government. Territorial militia should be arriving within the hour to investigate these serious allegations. The silence that followed was broken only by the whisper of desert wind and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Liana's perfectly laid plans had just encountered the one variable she hadn't anticipated. The loyalty of people who understood that some lines, once crossed, led straight to hell. But as if summoned by the very mention of his name, a new voice boomed across the parade ground with the authority of thunder itself. Stand down, all of you, by order of General Marcus Thornfield. And there, riding through the gates with an escort of 20 fresh cavalry, came the devil himself, resplendent in dress uniform and wearing the satisfied smile of a man who believed himself untouchable. The real battle was about to begin. General Marcus Thornfield dismounted with the casual arrogance of a man who'd never met a problem he couldn't solve with superior firepower and political connections. His silver hair gleamed beneath his pristine campaign hat, and his chest bore enough ribbons and medals to stock a military museum. But it was his eyes that made Indigo's skin crawl, pale blue chips of ice that held all the warmth of a Montana winter. Major Griffin, he said pleasantly, I trust you've secured the evidence. Sir, there have been complications. Thornfield's gaze swept across the assembled group like a scythe through wheat, lingering on each face with the calculating stare of a predator selecting his next meal. When his eyes found Indigo clutching the vest and its damning contents, his smile widened to show teeth white as bleached bone. Miss Prescott, isn't it? The talented seamstress who's caused us so much trouble. His voice carried the cultured tones of East Coast breeding mixed with the steel of a man accustomed to absolute obedience. I do hope you understand the gravity of your situation. You can almost smell the cordite and leather, feel the weight of 40 rifles trained on 6 people who dared to stand between a corrupt general and his secrets. The parade ground had become a powder keg with lit fuses on all sides. I understand plenty, Indigo replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. I understand that you've been selling weapons to Apache raiders. I understand that you've orchestrated attacks on innocent settlers to cover your tracks. And I understand that you murdered anyone who tried to expose your crimes. Thornfield clapped, his hands in mock applause. Bravo! Such moral clarity from someone so provincial. Tell me, my dear, what exactly do you propose to do with that understanding? Before she could answer, Ace stepped forward with the fluid grace of a gunfighter. Approaching high noon, she proposes to see justice done, General. Same as the rest of us. Ah, Sergeant Sheridan. Or should I say, the late Sergeant Sheridan. Thornfield's laugh held no humor. You realize you're officially dead, don't you? Killed in action during an Apache raid 3 weeks ago. Very heroic. Very final. Funny thing about being dead, Ace drawled, his hand hovering near his sidearm. It gives a man considerable freedom to speak his mind. The tension ratcheted higher as soldiers on both sides shifted nervously. Colonel Price stood rigid as a flagpole, his jaw working silently as he calculated odds that grew worse by the second. Mira had positioned herself near the enlisted quarters where she could reach cover quickly. Beau's eyes never stopped scanning the horizon for signs of the territorial militia he'd summoned. Only Bodhi seemed paralyzed by the weight of the moment, his massive frame trembling like an aspen in a high wind. "General," he said suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. "It don't have to be this way. You could just walk away. Take your men and ride out. Nobody has to die today." Thornfield's expression shifted from amusement to something far colder. "Oh, but I'm afraid that's where you're wrong, Quartermaster. You see, dead men tell no tales, but live witnesses. Well, they have an unfortunate tendency to develop consciences at the most inconvenient moments." He gestured to his escort, and 20 carbines swung toward the small group of defenders. "However," the general continued, "I'm not an unreasonable man. Miss Prescott, if you hand over that vest and its contents, I'm prepared to offer the rest of you a choice. You can accept transfers to remote outposts where the Apache problem tends to solve itself naturally, or—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. The alternative hung in the desert air like smoke from a funeral pyre, but before anyone could respond, a new sound reached their ears, the thunder of approaching hoofbeats, but from the wrong direction. Entirely. Beau's face went white as he recognized the distinctive war cries echoing across the desert. "Apache war party," he shouted. "Coming fast from the South Canyon." The timing couldn't have been worse or better, depending on perspective. Chief Red Hawk's warriors burst into view like a tide of painted fury, their war ponies kicking up dust, clouds that blotted out the horizon. They rode with the desperate urgency of men who discovered their supposed allies had been playing both sides of a deadly game. "Jesus Christ," Major Griffin breathed. "They're supposed to be 50 miles north, hitting the Peterson Ranch. Were you expecting them?" Ace asked with grim satisfaction. "Or did your boss forget to mention he'd been cheating his Apache partners? Same as everyone else." Thornfield's composure finally cracked. "This is impossible. Red Hawk has no reason to." His words were cut off by a rifle shot from the watchtower, followed by Corporal Jameson's panicked shout. "They're flying a white flag. Parley flag." The approaching war party slowed to a trot, then to a walk, as a lone rider separated from the group and approached the fort's gates. Chief Red Hawk himself rode with the bearing of a man who'd come to settle accounts written in blood and betrayal. "Colonel Price," the chief called out in accented but clear English. "I would speak with the soldier who calls himself Ace Sheridan, the one you reported dead, but who sent word of treachery among the blue coats." All eyes turned to Ace, who stepped forward with careful respect. "I'm here, Chief, and I've got the proof you asked for." Indigo's mind reeled as another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Ace hadn't just been gathering evidence. He'd been building alliances, reaching across the bloody divide between red and white to expose a corruption that threatened both peoples. "You see," Ace continued, addressing the stunned assembly, "Chief, Red Hawk never wanted war with the settlers. His people were starving on the reservation, promised supplies that never came, given rifles that jammed and ammunition that misfired. When the general offered him better weapons in exchange for staged raids, it seemed like the lesser of two evils." Red Hawk's voice carried across the parade ground like distant thunder. "But the white general lied. He sold us bad guns and blamed us for attacks we did not make. Now his soldiers come to our villages and kill our children for crimes we did not commit." Thornfield's face had gone the color of old parchment. His carefully orchestrated conspiracy was unraveling faster than cheap thread in a sandstorm. "This is preposterous," he blustered. "I won't stand here and listen to the ravings of savages and deserters." "Then don't stand," Mira said quietly. "Run. It's what cowards do best." But even as she spoke, the sound of bugle calls echoed from the east. The territorial militia finally arriving to restore order to a situation that had spiraled far beyond anyone's control. General Thornfield found himself trapped between Apache warriors who discovered his betrayal, territorial militia responding to reports of treason, and a small group of frontier folk who refused to let justice die in the desert. "Son, sir," Major Griffin said urgently, "we need to move. Now." But Thornfield's pale eyes had fixed on Indigo with the intensity of a man staring down his own destruction. Not without that evidence. His hand moved toward his sidearm with deadly intent, and in that moment, every person on the parade ground realized that some men would rather burn the world than admit they were wrong. The final reckoning had arrived. On wings of desert wind and the scent of approaching rain, General Thornfield's hand had barely cleared leather when three things happened simultaneously. Chief Red Hawk's rifle cracked like thunder, Ace's Colt appeared in his hand with gunfighter speed, and the territorial militia's bugle sounded charge from the eastern ridge. The general's shot went wide, his aim spoiled by Red Hawk's bullet taking him through the shoulder. He spun like a child's top, his pristine uniform suddenly decorated with crimson that bloomed across the gold braid like desert roses after rain. "Stand down." Colonel Price's voice boomed across the chaos. "All weapons down." By order of the territorial governor. Major Griffin's soldiers found themselves caught between conflicting loyalties and superior firepower. The territorial militia poured through the gates like water through a broken dam, their carbines trained on Thornfield's men with professional precision. Faced with overwhelming odds and no legal authority to support their actions, Griffin's escort began laying down their weapons with the resigned air of men who'd bet on the wrong horse. Indigo stood in the center of it all, still clutching the vest that had started this entire affair, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. You can almost taste the cordite smoke drifting across the parade ground, feel the electric tension of violence barely contained. "It's over, General," Ace said quietly, his gun still trained on the wounded man. "Your war's done." Thornfield laughed. A bitter sound that spoke of dreams turned to ash. "Over? Boy, you have no idea what forces you've set in motion. This conspiracy reaches all the way to Washington. I'm just one snake in a nest that stretches from here to the Capitol building." "Maybe so," Indigo said, stepping forward with new confidence. "But every nest starts with one snake. And sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to pull the right thread to unravel the whole thing." She held up the vest, its bullet holes and careful repairs catching the afternoon sunlight like stars in a midnight sky. "This isn't just evidence, General. It's proof that truth has a way of surviving, even when powerful men try to bury it." Chief Red Hawk dismounted and approached with the dignity of a man who'd chosen the harder path toward justice. "Colonel Price, this woman speaks wisdom. The truth is like water. It finds a way through even the smallest crack." Price stepped forward, his face bearing the expression of a man who'd aged years in the span of hours. "Chief Red Hawk, on behalf of the United States Army, I formally apologize for the crimes committed against your people. We will work together to ensure justice is served and peace restored to this territory." "Peace," Red Hawk mused, "is a flower that grows only in soil watered by truth and tended by courage." His dark eyes found Indigo's. This woman has both. But it was Ace who moved to her side, his green eyes soft with something that might have been wonder. "Indigo Prescott," he said, his voice carrying that particular drawl that made her pulse quicken. "You're either the bravest woman in the territory or the most foolish." "Can't a person be both?" she asked, surprised by her own boldness. His smile transformed his entire face, washing away the haunted shadows she'd seen there earlier. "Reckon they can. Question is, what's a woman like you planning to do with all that courage now that the shooting's stopped?" Before she could answer, Mira appeared at her elbow with the satisfied expression of a woman who'd lived to see justice triumph over corruption. "Well, first thing she's gonna do is finish mending that vest. No point in leaving good work half done." "And after that?" Ace asked, his eyes never leaving Indigo's face. She looked around at the assembled crowd, soldiers laying down arms, Apache warriors sharing water with territorial militia, Bo Gallagher already organizing the cleanup. With Bodhi's help, the desert had witnessed many changes. but perhaps none so profound as this moment when enemies chose to become allies in the service of truth. After that, she said slowly, I suppose I'll keep doing what I've always done, mending what's broken, stitching together what's been torn apart. That include broken-down cavalry sergeants with too many secrets and not enough sense. The question hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Around them, the sounds of justice being served continued, Thornfield and Griffin being loaded into a militia wagon under heavy guard, territorial officials taking statements from witnesses, Chief Red Hawk's warriors sharing coffee with Price's soldiers as they worked out the details of lasting peace. Depends, Indigo replied, her fingers still tracing the constellation of repairs on the vest. Are we talking about the kind of mending that brings two pieces back together stronger than they were before? That's exactly what I'm talking about. 6 months later, when territorial newspapers carried the story of General Thornfield's trial and conviction, they made much of the unlikely alliance between cavalry and Apache that had brought him down. They wrote extensively about the corruption that had reached the highest levels of military command and the brave testimony of witnesses who'd risked everything for justice. But they barely mentioned the seamstress whose careful stitching had preserved the evidence that made it all possible. Indigo didn't mind. She had more important things to occupy her attention, like the way Ace's face lit up when he returned from his daily rides, checking on settlements throughout the territory in his new role as territorial marshal, like the sound of his laughter, mixing with hers as they worked together in the garden behind their little adobe house, coaxing roses to bloom in the desert soil, like the way he still brought her his uniforms to mend, even though his new marshal's badge rarely saw the kind of violence that required patching. You know, she said one evening as they sat on their front porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson, I never did finish that vest properly. Ace looked up from the bridle he was repairing, his green eyes dancing with mischief. That's so? What's it missing? Proper embroidery. Something to mark its place in history. And what would you embroider on a vest that's seen that much excitement? Indigo smiled, her needle flashing as she worked on her latest project, a christening gown for Mira and Beau's expected arrival. Maybe something about how the strongest threads are the ones that hold everything together when the world tries to tear apart. Sounds like wisdom worth stitching into permanent record. As if summoned by their conversation, Chief Red Hawk appeared on the horizon, riding toward their home with the easy grace of a man making a social call rather than a war party. These visits had become regular occurrences, as the three of them worked together to maintain the peace they'd fought so hard to achieve. He's got news, Ace observed, reading something in the chief's bearing that spoke of important developments. But whatever news Red Hawk carried could wait. For now, there was only the desert evening, the promise of rain clouds building on the horizon, and the certainty that some things, like love, like justice, like the patient work of skilled hands making broken things whole, were worth any price that I in. The distance, thunder rolled across the sky, but this time it carried the promise of new growth rather than approaching danger. Well, friends, if you enjoyed this tale of courage, corruption, and the kind of love that grows strong in desert soil, be sure to let us know with a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of romance and adventure from the wild frontier. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from today. We love hearing from folks all across this great territory of ours.